Is feeding your toddler or little one turning every mealtime into a battle? Or are you second guessing everything from what you eat while breastfeeding to whether your picky eater is actually getting enough nutrition? Mama, you are not alone, and you are probably doing better than you think. Today, I have a very special guest joining me, a pediatrician and registered dietitian, and she is about to completely change how you think about feeding your baby, your toddler, and your whole family. Enjoy today's episode. Feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, or like you've lost yourself in the postpartum chaos? Whether you're 4 weeks postpartum, 2 years in, or done having babies, you deserve to feel like yourself again. Hey mama, I'm Val, a functional sports dietitian, postpartum fitness coach, and a mama who understands exactly what you're going through. Welcome to the Strong and Nourished Mama podcast, where you'll find simple, science-backed strategies to heal your core, rebuild strength, and restore your energy without the overwhelm. If you're ready to go from depleted to strong, nourished, and unstoppable, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Strong and Nourished Mama podcast. I'm Val, your sports dietitian, strength coach, and fellow mama, and I am so excited for today's episode because I have brought in an expert who covers something I get asked about all the time. How do we feed our kids well without losing our minds? Today's guest is Dr. Liz Daniels, and she is a credentialed combination that I absolutely love because it is super rare. Dr. Liz is a board-certified pediatrician and a registered dietitian. How cool is that? So she brings both the medical perspective and the nutrition science to the table when it comes to feeding babies, toddlers, and families. She is also a mom who knows firsthand how overwhelming nutrition can feel, especially in the early years. She's a partner at Northeast Cincinnati Pediatrics, where she practices medicine and is the host of the Nutrition for the Early Years podcast. She loves helping families move out of feeding anxiety and into confidence with practical, evidence-based guidance. Her work focuses on helping parents nourish their kids and themselves without guilt, perfectionism, or diet culture. What I love about Dr. Liz's approach is that it is practical, realistic, and completely judgment-free, which is exactly what tired moms need when it comes to feeding their kids. This episode covers breastfeeding nutrition, starting solids, picky eating prevention, surviving the toddler phase, and how to feed a whole family without making 4 different dinners every single night. There is so much good stuff in here, whether you are in the thick of breastfeeding, just starting solids, or deeply in my toddler will only eat beige food phase. This episode is for you. Let's get into it. Hey Liz, how are you?
I am awesome. Hi, Val. So good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you and welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy that you're on today. And I think this is going to be a really, really great episode for moms because not only are you a pediatrician, you're also a registered dietitian. So can you tell us and tell the listener how you got into this space and how you were able to combine the two?
Yeah, I thank you, first of all, because this is really, it's exciting and it's an honor. And honestly, it's still an evolving process. I think we're always in an evolution, but my evolution really started I was young. I went to college really early and had always wanted to do medicine and nutrition together and was told, yeah, that's not going to be possible to be a mom and do all those things. So pick one career and just do something really simple so you can be a mom. And I didn't like that answer. So I decided, okay, fine. I guess I'll start with being a dietitian. And I actually really loved that, but I have to be honest, I didn't love how my patients were taught nutrition in the hospital setting. So, there's more to it, but really what I decided was, I think actually what I want is to be able to do all of those things because, when we can combine them, like we're not one body part. We're not one thing. We're like this whole unit. And so how we feed ourselves is such a part of how we function, how we fuel, and how we take care of ourselves. It's how medicine works. Food really is that gateway to medicine. And so I decided to go to medical school. And then as luck would have it, I started having babies in med school. 10 out of 10 don't recommend. But that made me evolve once again because I realized that with nutrition, we want to make take amazing care of ourselves, but it's not sometimes until we become parents that we really take those decisions seriously because there's real stake in it, right? Like we want to be around for our children and our grandchildren. And that's when we start making some of the most impactful nutrition decisions in our life. And then I realized, okay, instead of just I think pediatrics is right for me because then I can blend those together and support the whole family when parents are really so ready to do that for their kids. And it's been such a joy. I've been in practice for 10 years. I'm a private practice pediatrician and I use nutrition in my everyday practice. So my patients know that well. I'm always going to be asking about, if they have nutrition concerns or ways that we can sort of support their health and feeding behaviors. And it's not a one size fits all. It's a how do we take care of you so you can be the best version of you and support our health long term.
I love that. And I think it's so cool that you were like, I can't just do one or the other. I have to bring them together. That's kind of similar with me, but with exercise and with nutrition, because I was in a minor in nutrition and I'm like, you can't do anything with a minor in nutrition, and then my degree in exercise science. And so I'm like, I'm just going to do both. So I really like that. And I like that you went the pediatrician route. And because like you said, when you have kids, like everything changes and it's so different. And how can you support families not only with just the baby and the toddler if they're sick, but their overall health, and then of course the family's health, and how is that going to impact them long term, decades down the road. So that's super cool that you brought those two together.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about obesity, this is a whole different topic, but really like the interesting outcomes with obesity research is it really shows that when the family makes a whole decision, like if there's an intervention that's needed for a kid, it's usually not successful if it's just kid targeted. It has to be really coming from the whole family. And I see that too, where families are really, they want to do the best they can for their kids. And that's such a beautiful opportunity.
Definitely, for sure. And today we're going to be talking about feeding your baby and your toddler without stress. I have a 2.5-year-old, and as a dietitian, it's stressful. It's a stressful time. So can you tell us why feeding little ones, whether it's a baby or a toddler, feels so stressful for moms?
Yeah. And I love that you put yourself into that too, because my feelings and my experience I'm not immune to it. Nobody's immune, no matter how much knowledge you have or experience. Like, in fact, I think I shamed myself more than I would have ever shamed anybody else I've cared for
Yeah,
because I
for
had
sure.
these expectations, right? So that's where it comes from. A lot of times as parents, and I don't know what your journey to becoming a mother was like, but I care for a lot of families where they were thinking about their nutrition before they were ovulating, like, well, how can I optimize my fertility with nutrition? And then they're pregnant and they're thinking about what they can eat and can't eat throughout their whole pregnancy. And then they're wanting to breastfeed. And now they have to think about how do I give myself nutrition to recover from birth, to fuel my body, to fuel the baby. And then they're feeding the baby and they're looking at every ounce and every bottle and every pee and poop. And then they're thinking about solids. So you are literally spending like 2.5 years zeroed in on how to grow this human being. And it's like all on your shoulders. And then all of a sudden you get a toddler who's like, I don't want that. No, you cut it the wrong way. That's not right.
Yeah,
And
always.
so, right. And so then you end up in this like, okay, you have this expectation and you've learned this pattern of not controlling, but curating their nutrition because it's been your responsibility. And then it slowly and sometimes overnight gets taken away from you. And that's a really hard adjustment for parents because you still want the best for them, but you have a child who has their own will. And as moms, usually we're very in tune with those relationships, especially moms today. And so you don't want to impact their feeding relationship or their relationship with their body or food in a negative way. So now there's that added pressure. And then, of course, you have Aunt Susan who says a comment about what your kid ate at some party. Like,
Look, why are they eating that? Why are you letting
yes.
or total opposite? Yeah.
Mhm. And then, of course, social media, all those pressures. But I think a lot of it is from like letting go of that responsibility because it's a heavy pressure we put on ourselves.
It's a lot of pressure. And when we talk, let's shift to, let's say, we'll start with breastfeeding because that's a lot of pressure where a lot of moms, you're pregnant, you're going to have your baby and you're thinking, I want to breastfeed. I want to do this. And especially as a first-time mom, of course, every journey is different, but as a first-time mom, you don't know what you don't know. And it's hard. It's not like just this easy thing for most moms. And so when we start at the beginning, when we're looking at breastfeeding and the pressure around that, Why is there so much pressure around nutrition while breastfeeding? We know that what we eat definitely impacts the breast milk, right? But why are we putting so much pressure on ourselves?
Well, I mean, I think you speak to this a lot, and I love that. So amazing job, because so much of this is, we want to provide our baby with great nutrition, but I think there's a lot of myth in what people think actually changes the breast milk. Meaning, you know, your I hear moms often say, like, okay, I know I need to eat great so that it's like comes out of my breast milk, or I need to eat this so that like my baby gets this nutrition. And actually, that's a lot of myth. So that's one part of it, like this external pressure to um, be this external pressure to really have high quality nutrition for your breast milk. But our bodies are in control of so much of that. Like our bodies keep it at a constant. The other part of that, and we could talk about that more, but the other part of that, I think, is this major bounce back pressure of, let's get our bodies back to a certain place. And so while your body is going through the fourth trimester where there's even more energy needs, there's a lot of restriction. There's a lot of, I really want to feel like myself again, or I want to feel like I can fit into that clothes again, or I have a wedding to go to and now I don't have a dress. So I need to get in, like there's these other factors that play into that. And we're like, it's hard to, you want your body back, right? Like you've used your body to grow this human for a long time. And so it's this both of those things happening at the same time where you're like, you want optimal milk and you also want your body back.
Definitely. Yeah,
How do you
that's
have
a lot.
both? It's hard. Yeah.
It is. It is. And I see a lot of moms going the restriction route, right? Whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
And then of course that's going to impact milk supply and all of that. But yeah, I think when we talk about that and we know, okay, there's these external pressures, there's probably internal pressure that we're putting on ourselves. Like sometimes I put that pressure on myself, like, okay, every 2 hours, like I have to do it. And I have to have a schedule and it has to be this perfect thing in this perfect way when really it doesn't have to be that way. Like looking back, I'm like, oh, okay, that was a little much for the 15 months that I breastfed. But what actually matters can you tell us what actually matters and what moms can actually let go of when they're in this part of their journey?
Oh my gosh. I feel like, you know, there's a lot that we can let go of. Sometimes we don't see that until hindsight. So I hope you give yourself grace. If you're in that season and you are breastfeeding, this is your message to give yourself grace because you're right. You don't know what you don't know. In the very beginning, part of this too is that as your milk supply is increasing in the first month of life, you're fixated on growing that baby. And a lot of parents, a lot of mamas think I have to drink enough water to get enough milk, or I have to take these supplements to get more milk. Like the galactagogues, I call them, they're the supplement, the things like your lactation cookies or brewer's yeast or, fenugreek, all the stuff. And guilty as charged. I tried those things too because I didn't want to fail. That's how I felt. It's like, if I can do these things to help me get milk, great, let's do it. And I don't think there's a ton of harm in those things, but I do think moms can have permission to let go of that because really what gives you more milk supply actually is frequency of expression. It's a good latch. It's having good mechanics at the breast. It's the mouth and the baby. And those things together are what are going to drive milk supply, not just, because think about this longer term. Like we haven't always had amazing, great protein bars and ways to get, quick nutrition in a short amount of time. Our bodies are designed to focus on taking care of the baby. And so we're not these fragile things that are going to fall apart in one day if it doesn't go well. We have permission to have grace. So if you're feeding your baby regularly, your milk supply will come along. And then once we're there, so milk supply being established, I think we really can also, it's easier said than done, but let go of some of that pressure to restrict or pressure to fit back into our old bodies because we've really transformed. And I want to invite moms to say, let's find the new you because it can be even better and even stronger and even healthier than it was before you had a baby, but it may not look or feel exactly the same way. And I think you do that beautifully with your program and with the ways that you engage moms in their fitness and nutrition paired together. But the other part of milk, and this is what's cool, is that breast milk really does stay pretty constant when we talk about macronutrients. So even if you didn't get all your protein in a day, or you didn't meet all of your macro goals that you're trying to do, like the amount of lactose, the amount of fat, and the amount of carbohydrate and protein, all of that together is going to be consistent for your baby from day one, essentially, to 365, or in your case, 400, which is amazing. And so that is going to continue because your body knows how to do it. And the micronutrients can adjust with our nutrition. But if you're low in your iron, you're low in your calcium, we want to optimize that so you can be fueled, but your body is going to take it from you. Like, it's not going to sacrifice for the baby. It's going to sacrifice you and your stores and your nutrition. And so that's why it's important to focus on mom, because our bodies are going to take care of that baby. They've been doing that for darn near a year to grow that human, and it's not going to stop now. This is
That's
how
so
we're designed
cool.
to be.
Exactly. And it's kind of cool how and fascinating how the body does that. Like, okay, we're going to feed this baby. You want me to feed this baby? I'm going to figure it out whether you give me the fuel or not. And that's something I talk a lot about with moms too. And so when what you're saying is letting go of the pressure, giving yourself grace, enjoying the process, that's also going to help, like, versus like all of the supplements, like being fixated on that, right? And what's going to stimulate breast production or breast milk production. It's kind of just like that connection and mechanics, which is also going to help with stress, I would imagine. So you're not like
Does.
stressing out about it and then you're not going to get a letdown.
That's right. That's right. Oh my gosh. Okay. So two quick, really sweet stories. I have several mamas who have spontaneously conceived triplets
Wow.
and crazy enough, breastfed these babies till their birthday, all three of them.
That is amazing.
And I have several mamas, even more mamas who have breastfed the twins all the way through. And I use that just as an example of how capable our bodies are. And it's just really amazing. Sometimes we put all this pressure on ourselves to do it when our bodies know what to do. We have to give it the space. We have to give it the fuel. That's key. But it's not always like up to us. Like, we're not going to make or break that necessarily. If we miss a meal, or you want to, right? But again, that's where that grace lies, is if you can kind of go with the flow and follow the cues that your baby's needing, it's going to come along. The other funny story is I was actually at a conference earlier this morning, and a friend of mine she's about 6 months postpartum, and she was wearing her wearable pumps during the conference. And she was like, I have to look at my baby so I can make more milk,
That's awesome.
And it's like, again, it goes back to that cue, like we're designed for that connection. And I think that's really a beautiful way to try to help support yourself, focusing on that
Definitely.
connection.
I love that. That's super cool that those mamas were able to breastfeed for that long, all three babes. And even if you're going the other route, if you're listening to this and maybe you didn't breastfeed, or maybe you didn't go as, maybe it was 2 months instead of what you thought you wanted to do, or your plan, that's another area to give yourself grace in, because you still grew human and you gave birth, right? And I think that's fascinating, because there's multiple ways that we can feed our baby. But ultimately, what I'm hearing is, let's let go. One, you can identify those external pressures or internal pressures, and then kind of let go of them and try to trust your body. Your body's going to do what it needs to feed your baby, but also fueling yourself, right?
And I love that you mentioned that about when things don't go well. So,
Yeah.
I mean, because honestly, this is actually where I spend probably more time in my office.
Okay.
In terms of conversation, like, these conversations go longer because there is such a grieving process when
Yes.
it doesn't go the way you want. And I think that women need a space to feel that, to experience it, and to recognize that it is still a really important and beautiful way to care for your baby. We have a lot of amazing things out on the market, and there's also milk donors and lots of other options that there weren't always before. But that's a delicate area, and especially learning how to fuel your body, because I think sometimes moms feel guilt, like, then I should have done something wrong, or I would have,
Yes.
if I had done this differently, then or if I had been able to nurse, like, in the first 30 minutes of life, if I hadn't had that hemorrhage, or if I hadn't had this thing happen, then I would have been able to breastfeed them. And, I just want to say, like, I would actually respectfully disagree. Like, there's this maybe a hot take, but the reality is that sometimes it doesn't work out, and it is not the mama's fault at all. Sometimes it's the baby's mouth is really little. Sometimes that baby's reflex, their reflex to nurse, is just very soft and it's not strong enough to really transfer adequate milk. And so there are certainly opportunities for addressing that. But I think it's true to acknowledge that and to recognize it because it's such an important part of caring for our families in general is knowing that that aspect needs care too.
Before we keep going, I want to take a quick second because something Dr. Liz just said about nutrition and breastfeeding connects directly to something I've been talking about all month on the podcast. If you are breastfeeding or postpartum and you are wondering whether your nutrition is where it needs to be, not just for your milk supply, but for your own energy, your own recovery, your overall health, that is exactly what the Functional Lab Review is for. It is a 30 or 60-minute one-on-one session with me where I review your labs through a functional medicine lens and tell you what your numbers actually mean for your body, including the nutrients that are most commonly depleted during breastfeeding, like iron, ferritin, B12, vitamin D, and so much more. We talked about all of those in episode 94 and 95. If you missed them, links are going to be in the show notes. If you have labs sitting in your patient portal or you want the right ones ordered, go to wellnessbyval.com/labs. The link is always in the show notes. Okay, back to Dr. Liz. So shifting to the part where baby is starting solids, and we may get into this time where, one, it can be very confusing. Like, how do I'm speaking for myself here because I was feeding my baby girl 6 months, starting to introduce things and, okay, is it small enough? Is it pureed? Well, all of that stress with it. But I was definitely overthinking things. And I think overall moms tend to overthink things. So let's first talk about picky eating. What actually helps prevent picky eating early on, if anything?
If anything, which sounds like you have experienced that sometimes not a lot.
Yeah.
You can do everything right. I mean, everything right. I see this often, and then kids still get picky. But there are some things that can move the dial a little bit. There are some things that we can do to support that. Actually, I think starting solids is a really magical time, especially for the parents who didn't get to breastfeed or engage in the feeding method that they had initially desired, whether that means you're pumping exclusively and you really wanted to have them at the breast, or you used formula, or your baby. This happens sometimes. Babies are like, I just don't want it.
Yeah,
it really does happen. But starting solids is fun because it should be this place to be able to bond over the table. And so that's where I like to start, is thinking about how do we support our babies for having fun at the table. So you bring the baby up to the high chair, even at 4 months or 3.5 months in their bouncer seat on the table. And we're like, they're watching you eat and you're making exaggerated faces. You are doing, all these kinds of silly gestures with the food and making sounds because they're mimicking, and they learn that pattern of enjoying what you're doing. They're watching. They really are watching. And so having fun, demonstrating that, modeling it. Modeling is a big part of practicing that feeding process, and that goes all the way through adolescence. But it really is a key piece. So I want to say that that's one. But when we look at the literature, there are a couple other factors that are pretty valuable moments to appreciate. One is babies actually have exposure to really strong aromatic fragrances and flavors through the amniotic fluid. So they can tell. Yeah. So like onion, garlic, kale, all of those things have actually these strong aromatic components, and babies can sense them in, they're by 8 weeks of age, their nose, their gustatory system, their olfactory system at about 8 weeks of age is able to detect some of those fragrances. Wow. So really itty bitty in your womb. And then throughout your pregnancy, they have continued exposure to those fragrances. After they're born, they actually can remember them. This is one of our most primitive forms of memory. Since, right? Like, it, you smell something and immediately you're like, that brings me back to childhood.
Yes, definitely.
Right? It's really primitive. And we have about 400 different scents that we can detect as humans. So having fragrance and exposure early on. And then when we're at the table, bringing them to the table, getting enough opportunity. Sometimes I'll hear families be like, well, we tried green beans and we tried it 3 times. And every time they gave us that face, or they pushed it out and they hated it. They don't like that one. And sometimes I'll pause and I'll say, well, have you tried it again? Can we try it in a different way? Because maybe instead of a puree, we can do it in, a baby-led weaning way, or maybe we can put it into play form. Because what we do know from the literature is that about 10 to 20 exposures are necessary for babies to become much more accustomed to that. So I think parents often, move on before they really could continue to give it an extra try. And then the babies who had exposure frequency during the first year of life, first year and a half of life, are much more likely at 3 to come back and try those veggies again. However, even when that happens, it's really normal for toddlers to reject that. And I'll talk about that in a quick second. But the continued exposure is really one of the biggest and longest lasting things. And then there's one last piece to that, which is for me, when I'm in my clinic, I'm always asking about 8 to 9 months. So sometimes I try to actually do checkups at 6, 8, 10, 12 months instead of 6, 9, 12, because there's a critical window for accepting textures at about 8 to 9 months for infants. And we know that if babies can handle lumpy textures well without having oral aversions, then they're much more likely to manage different sensory components by 3. So if I have a baby that's really struggling at 9 and they're still having, maybe they still have the tongue extrusion reflex in place and they're gagging really frequently, it's time for me to call in help for that family because I don't want to miss that window. If there's a baby who's struggling to get anything other than a thin puree in, then I definitely want to support them and try to add more like either OT or speech involved, because that tells me that the fine motor skills in the mouth need some more help. And then, but you're right. As you get older, toddlers, specifically at about 18 months, can start at that age to get something called neophobia, where they reject anything because really it's more of a personality stage, like their autonomy is growing. And so developmentally, they recognize that as new and foreign. And that to them is like they have learned. So sometimes when families tell me, my older kid tried all these things and they did great. We did all the same things and they were really, really good about eating everything. And now we did it with our second kid and it didn't work. And they reject all this stuff. And I'm like, well, actually, that tells me that they have learned a couple of things. They now have some forms of long-term memory are there. They've learned pattern recognition skills and they know that they can communicate with you and that you'll respond. So this tells me that development is actually going in a really great direction, but it's okay. So you don't have to worry and take that on as a failure as a parent that you did something wrong, especially knowing that you gave them those opportunities for exposure. That's just part of the development that you're in. And for some kids, that changes and they're much more comfortable with those same veggies again by 3 or 4, but sometimes it's not until 7 that happens.
Yeah.
So it might be a long time that you're in that picky phase.
Definitely. So I think that's just fascinating about the in utero of like what they're getting exposure to and like what they can smell at 8 weeks, like, whoa. And then the fact that after they're born, that's going to come back as a memory. That's super cool. And those are amazing foods to incorporate into your diet. And so picky eating, it's interesting because like with my daughter, she was in a phase where we're like, and they need, of course, more carbohydrates, but I'm like, she won't eat any protein. She used to love meat. And now she's like, no protein, no protein. She's just carb queen. And now she's coming back to it finally. So that's super cool to see. And so I also think the grace can continue all throughout motherhood. Probably we have to give ourselves great grace. And I think the interesting part too, you mentioned, how many times does it take for exposure?
Yeah, literature varies on this, but minimum 5. I usually tell my families actually 10 to 20. And
Wow.
when families go through feeding therapy, if they're worried about major red flags or feeding aversions, then it's sometimes even more, depending on the developmental stage of the child. But yeah, a lot. 10 to 20 is a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot.
It doesn't have to be in the same way though, right? Like it doesn't have to
Yes.
all be in green bean puree. I like to use that as an example. Sometimes it can actually be in the form, of a whole thing, or it can be mixed in with another food, sometimes cold, sometimes hot, because the texture, the temperature, and what it's paired with all affect the flavor.
Yes, definitely, which is going to affect them if they're going to have it or not, right? And then what I find interesting with, how they're watching you with everything in your life, with exercise and especially around eating and your relationship with food. But like we would have our daughter in her little bouncer, well, we would eat right when she was like 3 months. But now, even like she's watching us, or I'm like, this is so good. I love it. She'll do the same thing. Or if I'm like, hey, can you, I saw this on Instagram. You're going to laugh. I saw this on Instagram. I'm like, I'm going to try this and see if it works. Where like you have a picky eater, or it's just you're in toddler phase and you really want them to eat their food. And so you get your fork with the food and you're like, hey, can you hold this? And they like grab it and they hold it, but then they start eating it. And I tried it and she's like eating my food. I'm like, oh, okay.
Love that. I
It's
love
so
that.
funny.
That
But
is so funny.
I think if we can give ourselves grace here and understand that and trust them too, right? Like of course you have the developmental issues that can happen. And that's where you come in to being able to know what's going on, when it's okay to refer, or like you just explained, hey, it's okay. Like I don't have any worries here. Like everything's going well. They're developing really well. Just trusting your baby and toddler to be able to kind of figure it out, right?
Yes. And you know what's really interesting here? I love that you bring that up because that is exactly, that's the crux of it, right? Like, and this is, I always kind of joke, kids have like control over two things, right? What they put in their mouth and what comes out their butt. Like,
Yep.
you know, and it's not until you have a toddler that you're like, oh, that's really true. But this is a stage where you have, you know, internal pressures, you have all these things collide. You have personality, you have development, and you have biology all colliding at once. And it's really one of the first opportunities, aside from sleep, that parents like really have to start parenting and holding a boundary for themselves. And that's really hard because it's easy to think that you still have control over this, or this is still your responsibility to manage. And I think it's when the parent has to, the families that are most successful are the ones who recognize that they can trust their kid. I love to bring that up, and I actually use those words in well checks every single day when I'm looking at the growth curve, because I'm saying, oh my goodness, you know what? They were born with their ability to tell when they were hungry and full, and you listened the whole first year of life. They grew on that growth percentile beautifully, and you knew that they were hungry and they were full. When they're a toddler, they're still trustworthy. Nothing changed. In fact, they have even more experience with their hunger and fullness cycles. So you have the space to trust them. And we have the data to confirm that to be the case. If that ever changes, then our guidance will change. But until then, you can hold that boundary internally and say, I know my kid is going to tell me when they're hungry and when they're not. And that is such an important place to rest. But it's hard for parents. And that's really like the division of responsibility. I'm sure, you know, you're familiar with that too. Like, you know, you're as a parent responsible for what comes in the home and how you structure the meals.
Mm-hmm.
And your kiddo is responsible for if they're hungry, and if so, how much. And when that division of responsibility is set up and followed through by the parent, then the kid learns that they too can trust themselves. And that's what we want to see them for lifelong relationship with food, right? Lifelong relationship with our body. We want our kids to trust themselves because they can.
Exactly. I think that boundary is, you said it, it's really hard for us. Like you're like, okay, I have to stop myself. They're gonna tell me when they're hungry. They're gonna tell me it's fine. Like I don't have to force food. And this is something I talk about with adults. You know, of course, when it comes to mindful eating and intuitive eating, right? Like, are you part of the clean your plate club? Like, did you grow up being told like you have to finish everything on your plate, or you know, were you in a setting where you had to hurry up and eat very quickly? Because as you mentioned, what we're doing when we're babies, when we're toddlers, that's going to then translate what we're doing in our relationship with food as teenagers,
You are
as
so
adults.
right. You are so right. And actually, when I have a family who's worried about how picky their kid is or behaviors that are going on, those are the questions I ask. I actually don't start off with, well, what is your kid eating? I start off with, especially because I have the gift, and this is one of the reasons I chose pediatrics too. I've seen these parents probably 15 or 20 times by then, right? So they know me, they trust me. We have deep relationships. We talk about vulnerable things. They probably cried in my office already. Like we can go deep. I can't do that if I've only known them once, right? But I'll say like, okay, I want to know what it felt like at the table when you were a kid, because my guess is you're worried about that happening again. And I have some of the craziest stories come out, and families tell me, and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that's what I was really afraid of. I was a really picky kid as a little kid, and I felt so embarrassed that I didn't want to eat at my friend's house, or I felt so embarrassed that, my parents would send me to my room without dinner, and I just can't do that to my kids. So I don't know how to hold these boundaries because I don't want them being like me, or I don't want them having that experience like I had. And so it's this, digging that up is so important to being able to move forward.
Percent. Yeah, and that's hard. That's really hard to do, right? Especially when you have a million things as a busy mom. You have a million things going on and you want to get dinner on the table and you have to clean up and then you have this and you have that. And, like to be able to really like go inward and think about your relationship with food and how that's impacting your little one. I've had to do that with myself. I'm like, okay, I just need to like let it go.
Mm-hmm,
It's
mm-hmm,
fine.
mm-hmm.
So that
Same.
I like that you have that relationship and that you're with your clients and with the families because you're seeing them a lot. Now, what is after two, how often are you seeing your families?
We do like two, 2.5, 3, and 4. But
Okay.
what happens for a lot of families is they have another baby.
Oh, yeah. So then they're coming
So
soon. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. And I treasure that. I mean, it is really, I really am so, so lucky. I have such an amazing job, and my families are truly just my greatest gift, aside from my own children. Like, it's
Mhm.
really a joy to be able to walk through those seasons with them, because when you have that continuity, you get to see them grow and mature, and it is just amazing what families are capable of.
Yeah.
And to that point, we, and myself included, like when we want and we're ready to make some of those deeper changes, they bubble up. And it's because there's been struggle at the table. So, like, I would be the first to admit that I have said all the things I never wanted to say. I have done all the things with my own children that I'm like, "Ah, God, and I wish I hadn't done that,"
Yeah.
because this is how you learn. And so it's okay. It's okay. And they're not going to remember all of those things. They're not.
That's true. That's a good point. I mean, thinking of myself, I've told myself, like, okay, I'm not going to say like you can't have anything then if you don't finish this, right? But then it like comes out and you stop and you're like, okay, okay, how can I like change that next time or what does that look like? And if they, because you have to have a boundary, multiple boundaries, because you then, and walk us through this, don't want to feel like you're having to make multiple meals all the time. Like I have to make a meal for my spouse, I have to make a meal for myself, and then I have to make a different meal for my kids because they won't eat those things. And so walk us through, and maybe this is even after toddlerhood or whatever, but let us know of how to kind of go through that with, hey, this is what we're having for dinner. Here's some variety, but having a boundary of I'm not going to make mac and cheese and chicken nuggets and spend my whole evening in the kitchen.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It's really tricky. So, just for some like simplicity's sake, and I hear this all the time, right? Like I'll tell, and same, like my, that's how it was for me growing up. Like my mom was totally the short order cook, and it made me sad. Like she was in the kitchen for hours, and I hated that because I was like, Mom, I just want you to come sit here and like be with me. She's like, well, I got to do this and I got to take care of this. Um, when I am talking with families, usually I say to them, like, what do you think is enough for like family meals? Because we all want to have them 7 nights a week. But the reality is you might have, events in the evening, you might have sports in the evening you're taking your older kids to, or other activities that happen. So really like 2 family meals a week is like the gold standard. Like if we can get, or not gold standard, excuse me, 2 meals a week is a reasonable expectation to say we want to plan to have that at least 2 times a week. These sit down, this is our family meal, meaning the structures might look different on other nights. And so when you're going from I was a short order cook to I don't want to be a short order cook, you don't make the goal 7 nights a week because that's unrealistic. So you start there and then you build upward. But depending on the age of the kid, so let's say this is a toddler, and I think that that's going to look different than older kids. So I can speak to both of those. But with the little kid, say you have like a baby and you have a toddler and they're starting to dislike the things that you have on the table. I really encourage families to think through, having some safe foods at the table that you know that your kid will eat, plus the foods that you naturally want to have. So if my kid is in the beige stage and they only want mac and cheese and chicken nuggets, then maybe what I'm going to consider doing is I'm going to have maybe like fish that night and then a little bit of mac and cheese, but also broccoli and then a fruit. And we're going to have that, and we'll have milk too. So you have that at the table, and we're saying, okay, here's a safe food that we know you're willing to try or at least have, because toddlers will change their mind every day. And that's not your fault. Doesn't mean you need to make something else. That's just how toddlers are.
Yeah.
Then you have served a meal. The thing here to remember too is that kids, especially the toddler kids, get the majority of their calories and nutrition in before 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
So most of the time they're not that hungry, which means you don't have to put that pressure on yourself for it to be perfect. And whether or not they try it, again, isn't a judgment on if you did a good enough job. Because keep in mind that like breakfast is going to be one of the biggest meals for a lot of toddlers. So often if I have a kid who's really stuck, I'll say, okay, how do we get veggies in our breakfast? And guess what? There are ways. There are amazing waffles that have veggies in them. There are sausages that have veggies in them. There are ways to get those veggies in other ways or expand the palate when they're more willing to try them. And then at dinner time, it can be this, okay, we're going to have at least one safe food that we know that kid would have. Like in that situation, they'd have mac and cheese and the fruit. And maybe they'd be willing to put it on their plate. Maybe they take a bite. Maybe they wouldn't. We would celebrate even if it was on the plate.
Nice. That's super helpful.
And then as your kid gets older and they're capable, they get to be a part of that meal process too.
Yeah.
Because then they realize that that's work and that's their chore. Like for my kids, I would tell them as they get older, part of your chore is putting things on the grocery list. We have an Alexa in our house. And so they've all learned, Alexa, add such and such to the shopping list. And,
That's so cool.
and then as they get older, they can get involved too. You have the toddler station. Your toddlers can be there helping you prep your veggies, even if they have the plastic knives. Like that is a part of the process. You get them in there and get them involved because it's really, really hard. And then the older they get, the more accustomed they get to it. But then the boundary setting comes in this way. You know, you can have something like what we used to call emergency food, where we'd say, okay, this is what we're having for dinner. And I'm so excited to share it with you. If you don't want to eat this, that's okay. But here's the food that you can get to when you're all hungry. The pantry is going to be closed for now. The kitchen closed theory can work for some people, it can be triggering for others. So it's kind of a variable thing, but I think it's how it's delivered that's most important, right? We're not shaming anybody. I think the biggest mistake would be more when parents create a consequence around, you're not getting up from the table till you eat this. Or if you don't eat this, this thing is going to get taken away, or you can't go to your friend's house until this happens.
Yeah.
Those consequences are what really impair the relationship. So as long as it's brought in and there's a new food that's introduced, but it's done paired with the safe food, and then there's no consequences if they don't eat it, is really where I set that line.
That's really helpful. And I like the pantry is closed for now because that's where my daughter will go and just grab her pouches and her snacks and all of the things. And having that emergency food, like, hey, this is what we're having for dinner. Pantry's closed. I need to practice this. Pantry's closed. This is our emergency meal if you want to have that. And then they can always eat something later. But I think that's helpful because it's just a stressful time from toddler, I would imagine, until they get older with all of it.
And here is that they're always pushing boundaries. So again, that's going to be the lever that they try to pull for control. And so what you have to remember too is that you had a baby once that was in their earliest stage with their tiniest belly and their most sensitive nutrition needs, and they ate every 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
So a toddler who's bigger, who has more capacity, can wait 2.5 hours.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Like it's okay. And so sometimes when kids are asking for food or they're asking for something else, it's important to recognize that they may not actually be asking for food. Like they might actually be asking for connection.
Yeah.
They might actually be asking for, I want this other thing because it's a dopamine. Like there's other reasons that we eat, and we learn that really young. So you can redirect that with, let's do a dance party together. Let's do this thing together. And a lot of the time that shuts it down instead of having to go into a really big battle. If we can connect instead of make it a battle, we get somewhere, and it just naturally dissolves for a lot of kids.
I like that you bring that up because I mean, that's something that I talk about regularly with moms or, adults, and something that I didn't either think about or it just didn't come to my attention with with your little ones of that dopamine search and that connection. And sometimes it can be stressful to bring your little one into the kitchen, but it's I have found that it's something that she really loves to do. It's so fun for her. I'm like, okay, here are your mushrooms, and you can chop them up, do your thing. And then she's more willing to eat those foods too. And it's not an every night thing. Like you said, like let's choose our nights of like when she can be in the kitchen and help me out and help me cook. Or she's like, she'll like walk over from the expo. I got a whisk. Yeah. It's hers now in her little kitchen. And she's like, I want to do it. I want to do it. I'm like, okay, come over here and help me. But I think that's super important, and maybe even kind of designating days to where it's not on a night where you have a million things to do, but maybe it's a Friday night or a Saturday night, or a night that you have more time to be able to have your little ones explore when it comes to food in the kitchen. And that's something that I'm trying to do more of too, because it can be hard. It can be really hard.
And it doesn't have to just be veggies. I have one family
Yeah.
and I love this. They make sourdough together
Ooh.
and it's like their science experiment and their kids
Cool.
are little. So they have three now. They just had a new baby, but it's really funny because she's like, we didn't even set out to do it that way. We just like, that's just, we love making sourdough. And when we found out that she really likes looking at the bubbles and she likes being able to punch it down or she likes being able to turn it, that kind of, those little things, they add up. My kids are teenagers now and they'll tell me, oh my gosh, I love these. I love that we did these things. And I have to tell you, like, I had my kids when I was in medical school and in residency and starting out in early practice. I was not making dinner every night. I
Yeah.
was not. I wasn't there like doing these perfect little dinners every single night. It was weekly. And actually for us, we do special Sunday breakfast. So my evenings are always busy because I was working until 8 p.m. seeing kids late, because that's what you do when you're starting out in practice. And so, my evenings were busy. And for us, we were cultivating that mealtime in a different way and it worked. And they remember that and they love it now. It's
That's
like they get up
awesome.
and they make their own eggs. They do this
Yeah.
whole stuff together and they're a part of it.
Yeah, that's so cool. And then that's something that they'll take on with their families when they get older too, those memories. So you mentioned when you're introducing food to like your 6 month old to your baby, it can get kind of messy or like exploring. What does that look like when as they get older and they're, let's say like my daughter, 2.5, 3, 4 years old, the messy meal that's doing a lot of nutritional work, but for them to be able to explore and to be able to try new foods, but sometimes you're like, oh, like I don't want to clean that up or I don't want to do that. How can you walk us through what you talk about with moms?
Okay, so my husband is like neurotic in some ways, and I love him dearly. He was a stay-at-home dad for 13 years. And so he was the one who was like, if this is going to be really messy, we're not doing
Yeah.
it.
Funny.
So again, it was like a planned experience for us.
Yeah.
And sometimes that was going to be out on the deck, or at a picnic, where we could, go play in a splash pad afterward or go do something else. Like those were sometimes intentionally outdoor experiences. But some of the foods that I think there's two parts to this, like one where there's like a lot of nutritional work and a little bit of food. Actually, baking is really fun in that way because especially if you're able to put, like there's a recipe we used to do all the time when our kids were little was, making muffins and we'd put a bunch of spinach, pureed spinach in there and their chocolate muffins. Great way to kind of sneak that in. And for what it's worth, I do think like sneaking veggies in the little is okay. It's just that you sneak them in and then you have them on the plate too. So you're getting both opportunities to
Yes.
experience
Okay.
that, right? But that would be a big part of our messy experience of like, okay, kid number two is going to help us cook, which means that we need all hands on deck to help clean up. But it would have to be a planned experience. Sometimes it was also like silly enough, like something that grandma would do really well
Yeah.
because she didn't mind. She
Yeah.
didn't mind. Sushi was another one for us where our kids, my husband really loves sushi and he liked to make sushi. So I know, but the,
That seems hard.
like, it's actually not that hard. I mean, he did it. So,
Nice.
love you, Joel. No, it would end up being messy with the kids because they would take it
Yes.
apart and there would be stuff everywhere. And then the sticky rice would get stuck to things.
Gosh.
But it was it was an opportunity to get a lot of different components
Mm-hmm.
in at one bite.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think planning those meals out, um, just like with like introducing them into the kitchen, but and it doesn't have to be this perfect meal, this perfect look a certain way. I think a lot of the times that's what we think it has to be this one way, but there's so many ways to enjoy food. Like the picnic. Like I haven't even thought about going on a picnic in like ever. And so now I'm like, I want to go take my daughter on a picnic. Like that would be fun, especially now, that it's warmer and the sun is out longer. Like that could be a super fun experience to be able to enjoy food in a different way. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. And farmers markets are another fun way to do that in a
Yes.
low pressure way. Yeah. So I grew up in Austin and then we moved to Cincinnati, but both of those cities luckily have a great scene for farmers markets. And so that was a really fun way because farmers always want to share what they have. And so if it wasn't coming from me, it was like this invitation, right?
Hmm.
And to this same degree, like kids do this funny thing where they'll eat something for your friend or your mother-in-law that they wouldn't eat for you or for
Yeah.
daycare. I'll hear this all the
Yes.
time. Like they'll eat this thing at daycare, but they won't eat it at home. And you're like, cool. Why does it have to be you? Like it doesn't.
Yeah.
Take that pressure off yourself. It happened. Like celebrate it. And those are really fun opportunities too.
That's awesome. I like that you said that. What's one thing you wish every mom knew about feeding their kids? And maybe you already said it, but what's one thing you wish every mom knew about feeding their kids, whether it's baby, toddler, older kids, whatever?
I think most families are doing a lot of things right. Like they really, really are. And so I think that most families know what they need to do. It's the how that gets really sticky. And I think that if they knew that they could ask for help,
Yes.
then that would be huge, right? Like if they knew that they had an opportunity to say, well, is it okay to like get support from somebody else? Like, can I, you don't have to be the one to know how to do it all, even though you know your kid best.
I like that advice to be able to pull other people on your team and to be able to ask questions. Like just having this conversation now about the picnic, right? Like you're learning something new where you don't have to put all of that pressure on yourself. What is one simple shift that moms and with their family and kids can make this week that could be super helpful and supportive for them?
Okay, so funny you would say that. Actually, I have a little newsletter, and this was what I put in my newsletter this week because it's like I heard this like already 3 times today, 3 times this week from different parents. They would say, the mealtime is just so stressful, and I said, well, I wonder what it would feel like if you had a different script or if you could say a different thing. And anytime we're trying to handle something that's stressful, usually the words that come out are words that are not think we're stressed and we're not in a moment of ease. But if you practice that before you're in that moment, it becomes much easier. We do this when we're becoming doctors to learn how to do CPR, how to counsel grieving parents when there's a loss. Like you practice what to say before you're in that high stakes situation. And at the table, you can practice saying, oh my goodness, this thing is green. This thing is crunchy. This food is sour. Objectively qualifying the food instead of the subjective, like this tastes really good. You liked it last time. Those kinds of subjective things create this tension of expectation. And I say to my families often, like, let go of your expectation and focus on your invitation. And if you can think about describing this food in an objective way that doesn't have any meaning of goodness or badness or value, whether you ate it or value whether you didn't, then it makes that pressure much less, right? So if you can practice before you're serving the plate, I put potatoes on your plate. Potatoes are also in French fries. Potatoes have a crunchy outside and a soft inside. Some people like them with ketchup. Some people eat them with their fingers. Totally objective.
Nice.
But you have to practice some of that, right? So like
Yeah.
in my newsletter, I sent out this whole list of vocabulary words that you could like
Yeah.
sort of mad lib your own script together if you wanted to. But just choosing to say something really objective is a simple thing that can make a huge difference at the table.
Yeah, I would definitely have to practice that to be able to think. Otherwise, I'm what is something objective that I could say? And then that's more stressful. But I think putting it into practice, practicing it before you actually, get into that situation, that can make a big difference.
I actually have some families who they'll have like a little whiteboard or a list on a pantry door
Oh,
nearby, and they actually feeding therapy sometimes will do this too, but they'll have a list of foods that have different objective words that they can attach to them, and they'll say we want to find something on the plate, so they don't have to think about the words, right? So like the chart would say crunchy, sour, sweet, salty, green, yellow, red, brown, and then they would say let's find something on our plate that matches that.
that's cool. I like that
And it's
idea.
really simple. And that way you don't have to do the thinking, but you're still encouraging that whole family dynamic to be really objective.
I like that because that's something that I coach moms with is like, how can we get more variety on our plate or how can we get more colors, right? And I think that can be a really great way to kind of incorporate that with the different, like the objective, the textures and the colors and the different types of foods. That could be super fun. I like that. I'm going to try this. So lots of really good information, Liz. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast. And can you let the listener know where they can find you, connect with you, and if they wanted to work with you, how they would do that?
Absolutely. So I am on Instagram at Dr. Liz New Story Nutrition, but I do a podcast called Nutrition for the Early Years. And I love sharing this kind of information with families. So that's really where I spend a lot of my time and attention. And through my website, you could also reach out to me, join my newsletter, and we could work one-on-one if that was something that really would be supportive for you.
Awesome. Perfect. And I'm going to put all of that information in the show notes. So you can go to the show notes, get that information, follow her, listen to the podcast, get on her newsletter, and you won't regret it. Thank you so much, Liz. Okay. How good was that? I told you Dr. Liz is amazing. My biggest takeaways from this conversation, and I had a few because there was just so much good information here. First, the amniotic fluid thing completely blew my mind. So the fact that babies are already being exposed to aromatics and flavors through the amniotic fluid during pregnancy is amazing, right? So meaning the foods you eat while pregnant are literally introducing your baby to flavor before they are even born. Second, trusting your baby and your toddler's hunger cues. This is huge. This one hit me personally as a mom. We are so conditioned to worry about whether they are eating enough that we override their natural instincts. Dr. Liz reminded me that babies, toddlers, are actually really good at regulating their own intake when we get out of the way and trust the process. So that's beautiful. And third, involving kids in the kitchen and grocery shopping, such a simple concept, but the research behind it is super powerful. So when kids help choose and prepare food, they are so much more likely to eat it. And I've seen this firsthand. And of course, it takes extra time. It takes extra planning, right? You're not going to do this on a day that's super busy and hectic, but it's something that we can start to incorporate a lot more in the household. A huge thank you to Dr. Liz Daniels for joining me today. You can find her at her socials and her website. It's all in the show notes. So go give her a follow and listen to her podcast. If this episode helped you, please share it. Send it to a mama friend who is in the trenches of toddler feeding just like me or just starting solids. Tag me on Instagram at wellnessbyval_. And of course, I will always share when you tag me. And if you want to make sure your nutrition is supporting your postpartum recovery and energy, the functional lab review is open at wellnessbyval.com/labs and the Strong, Nourish, and Energized Mom Method 8-week group coaching program at wellnessbyval.com/program. Both links are always going to be in the show notes. Next Monday, we are kicking off May with one of the most personal episodes yet. I am sharing exactly what I eat in a week as a working mama, sports dietitian, hybrid type of athlete, real, unfiltered, and no perfection. You are going to want to tune in for that one for sure. So make sure you are subscribed to the show so that it drops right into your feed Monday morning. I will see you then. Take care of yourself, mama. Stay strong and stay nourished. Hey mama, I hope you loved today's episode. If you got something out of it or simply enjoyed listening, would you please take 30 seconds to share it with another mom who could use the support? And if you haven't yet, I would be so grateful if you could leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you tune in. It truly means the world to me and it helps the show reach more amazing moms like you. All right, time to go chase my toddler around, stay strong and nourished, and I'll be back on Monday with another episode. Talk soon.